It's hard to believe that something that you start right out of high school can turn into this. And raise your hand if you're in high school right now. It's a lot of high schoolers. When I was your age, I was constantly told that I must conform and I must take some prearranged steps in order to be successful in America. Some things happened that I couldn't have planned, and I got some really good mentorship. And I decided to start Turning Point USA in this town, as we talked about. And then you look around, and only in this country, which that flag represents, is a story like this possible, where an 18-year-old doesn't go to college, starts something from nothing with no money, no resources, no connections, quite honestly, no idea what I was doing. And it turns into the largest young conservative event in American history, and a movement that's going to really help take back our country. Only in America is that story possible? So I want to talk about 5 specific things that I want you to take away with. We're going to talk a little bit about economics, and then we're going to talk about things that are even more important than policy discussions, and then some action steps for all of you after this conference. So the first thing I want to reemphasize is something that has been a theme of this conference, which is the difference between corporatism and capitalism. Now, we're living under a series of corporate tyranny right now in our country. It's happened for a variety of different reasons. And so when I first started Turning Point USA, the conservative movement had an overemphasis, in my opinion, on pure free marketeering ideas. Now, I love markets, and I love markets because they're good for human beings. I love markets because we love private property. But markets should be a means to a desirable end. Markets should be a means that allow families to prosper, that allow decent middle-income workers to be able to have meaningful lives. We should not defend the market, or what we call the market, if all of a sudden the result is unfavorable to the type of country we want to live in. For example, you do not have to defend things that are ugly or that have a result that are against our value system, like the importation of opioids into our community. We should say there's something wrong when a business model is to try to addict you and your friends on a substance that destroys lives. That is not defending the free market. In fact, we should say those people should go to jail for pushing opioids into our community. Another example, of course, is this idea of big tech. This is something that almost every single speaker has talked about throughout the last couple of days. But people say, well, Charlie, they are private companies. You can't touch them because they are not bound by the First Amendment. A couple things on this. Number one, they are information highways, no different than we have interstate highways. Interstate highways sometimes are privately funded. For example, the Chicago Skyway. Anyone from Chicago here? I know we got a couple Chicago people. I'm from Chicago. It's a great place to be from. Fun fact about Illinois is we have term limits in Illinois. It's different than term limits in Florida. It's 1 term in office, 1 term in jail. So our politicians, when we ask for their cell number, we actually mean their cell number. I could keep going on Chicago. In fact, my grandmother was a lifelong Republican, passed away in the mid-1990s. She's been voting Democrat ever since. Okay, I'm done. So Chicago Skyway, coming from Indiana to Chicago, is a private highway. But it's illegal under federal law if the owners of that private highway say, you know what, we're not going to allow Trump supporters to drive on this highway. We're not going to allow socialists to drive on this highway. Could you imagine if all of a sudden American Airlines came out and they said anyone who listens to the Charlie Kirk Show podcast is not allowed to board this airplane? Readers of the Wall Street Journal are not allowed to fly on Delta Airlines. What if all of a sudden McDonald's said they're not going to serve Big Macs to socialists? All of a sudden, if we allowed viewpoint discrimination in these other industries, it would be met with huge outrage. But when we talk about these multi-trillion-dollar companies that are much more important than hamburgers and airlines, we're talking about ideas. We're talking about how people view the world. All of a sudden, we're supposed to act as if they're the local barber shop, that they deserve the same types of protection. But their business model is unique, because while we think there is no charge to use these big tech companies, in reality, they're not giving you a product or service. They're selling you. You are what they sell. You are their product. Do you notice that only addictive drugs and social media companies call the people who use their platforms users? Why all of a sudden should you be called a follower? Oh yes, I'm a follower of that person. Shouldn't we be trying to create a generation of leaders, not a generation that's always following the crowd? Do you start to see that these tech companies have a business model that is different than anything we've ever seen? And now they've created trillions of dollars of monopolistic value, you could call it, and then they go as so far to say that we are the new government in America, the government of Menlo Park. So the conservative movement needs to recommit ourselves to being the guardians and the protectors of desirable ends. So very simply, it's not a good thing that Amazon has contributed to 40% decrease of small businesses. It's not a good thing that Amazon has almost doubled their stock price in the last 3 years, but we have less small businesses than almost ever before. That's a bad thing for our nation and for our country. But people like Jeff Bezos have done so much damage to our country. So do we as conservatives, do we just kind of play indifference? Do we say, you know what, Jeff Bezos, that's freedom, he can do whatever he sees fit? Or should we say, wait a second, this is causing irreparable damage to this beautiful gift, our country and our home. It's not a good thing when Amazon is worth $1.8 trillion and average family incomes are going down. Now, I'm not suggesting we nationalize Amazon or confiscate all the resources. I'm saying this, that you guys should not pay a higher tax rate than Amazon or Jeff Bezos. That's a very simple thing, that Jeff Bezos should not be able to pay a lower corporate tax rate or personal tax rate. So we have to differentiate between this idea of markets, which we like, this idea of private property, which we like, and entrepreneurship, which we really like, and this idea of entrenched corporate bureaucracy. We need to stand for capitalism, not corporatism. Number two, the second thing I hope you take away from this conference is that every person here, you should desire to try to find a transcendent order. That could mean a lot of different things. What I'm really saying, though, is that you need to find things that matter more than you do. You're not the most important thing ever to exist in the history of the world. So, for example, it might be going to church. It might be realizing that you're made in the image of your Creator. You see, when you're in college, the opposite is usually taught to you. You see, the way college used to work is you would go to college and they'd say, there is beauty and there is truth and there is wonder in the world. Let's go on a journey together to try to find it. Instead, they bring you into the first college classroom and they say, there is no beauty, there is no truth, there is no wonder. All there is pleasure and pain, oppressor and oppressed, and we're going to create you to be a revolutionary to try and change the world around you. The most important fight is not against racism. The most important fight is not against some sort of social injustice. The most important fight is not even against Jeff Bezos. You know what the most important fight you're ever going to have? It's against yourself. The most important thing that you will realize in 18, 19, 20 is that self-control matters a lot more than self-esteem. That as soon as you become at least better prepared to control your own natural impulses, that's when you can actually live a free life. And it's the opposite of what secular society will tell you. They'll say freedom is doing what you want to do whenever you want to do it, however you want to do it. You'll be miserable. Instead, freedom is being able to say no to the proper things and pursue the things that are virtuous and desirable. Now, when you're 20 years old, this is the hardest time. Because especially today, when you can order things on demand in real time and it's just right there in front of you. And so the generation of parents that raised all of you, I won't comment on how they've done, I'll just say this, they've overplayed what I consider to be one of the most damaging movements in American history, which is the self-esteem movement, where they say you're the most wonderful thing ever to exist, and what we need to do is build you up because of that. Now, it sounds like a good idea, but what does the self-esteem movement actually end up doing? Is it almost de-emphasizes self-improvement. When I was in high school, they'd have these ridiculous, emoji yellow stickers, like 10 years ago. And they said, self-esteem, you're perfect the way you are. And I used to ask my teacher, if I'm perfect the way I am, why am I in school? Like, why am I here? Why are we still waking up early and doing homework and trying to better our own lives? When in reality, the younger you realize that this is going to be a lifelong struggle against your impulses. This is going to be a lifelong journey of you hopefully becoming better prepared with self-control. Now, those of us that are Christians believe that self-control is not something you actually end up getting. It's actually a fruit of the Spirit. It's a gift of the Lord. Now, however you view that, you will be freer the better prepared you are to be able to reject the things that aren't good for you and pursue the things that are virtuous. And here's a good rule for life. The things that give you a quick rush of dopamine are typically and usually not good for you. I'm going to say that again. The things that give you a quick rush of dopamine are usually not good for you. In fact, they usually come at a considerable cost. Number 3, this is so important. We got to know our stuff in the conservative movement. Every one of you should commit yourself to a lot of things after this conference. Our generation needs to read more. Yes, books. That's right. We need to read books more. Not just watch 5-minute videos, which I love, but we have to become masters of what this document, the United States Constitution, means. Who wrote it? Why is it here? What does it mean for you? Not just be able to memorize the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, not just be able to know the 7 action verbs that are in the preamble, but how does it apply to you? Is it unique? Is it different? Is it exceptional? Who is the author and the architect behind it? Who is James Madison? Who is Alexander Hamilton? Who disagreed with them? Where did they meet? When was it done? Was it by consensus? Was it difficult? Was it messy? Why does that matter? It matters for a couple different reasons. The more you learn and the deeper you dive, the better prepared you will be when all of a sudden someone comes up against you and tries to challenge your values, that tries to push back against you. Number 2, all of a sudden you'll be less intimidated than ever before when you get called all these names: racist, bigoted, homophobic, colonialist, awful person. You say, you know what? I know what I am, I know whose I am, I know what I believe and why I believe it, and you're honestly far too unsophisticated for me even to take you seriously. The activist and the conservative movement that kind of reads casually, kind of doesn't really get deep into the ideas, they are not prepared to go up against the well-funded and awfully persuasive leftist movement we've seen in our country. And so where does one start to do that? Well, we obviously try to do that on our podcast, but it's not just limited to that. There's an infinite amounts of content online, from the Hillsdale online courses, which are terrific, to many of the thinkers that you've heard up here on stage. And here's a good starting point for every single person here. Start with our country's foundational documents. What are the ideas that led to the Declaration? What are natural rights? Who gives you rights? What does it mean to actually have rights? Do you have a right to housing, food, Xbox, stimulus checks, weed, and masks? And if not, why? Do you have a right to have your rights not infringed upon? Or do you have a right to material stuff? If you're not prepared to answer those questions, then eventually you'll be thwarted by somebody on the left. But when you are prepared to have those things, all of a sudden the level of effective activism from all of you doubles and triples. All of a sudden, when you then get confronted in a workplace environment, when you say, hey, you got to take the vaccine or else you're going to get fired, you'll have the confidence, the courage, and the clarity of thought to be able to push back against that. I want this room right here to commit to saying, you know what, we're going to know our stuff. We are going to be the best informed, best read, and most understanding these ideas in the history of the conservative movement. And the result of that will be, all of a sudden, a cultural transformation, the likes of which we have never seen before. Number 4, this is very important, which is do not conform. Let me say that again. Do not conform. Now, there's plenty of Bible verses that go to this. Do not conform to the ways of this world. But let me tell you about something that is called the Ash conformity test. I just did a whole podcast on this. And every single one of us, myself included, have fallen to this sort of psychological manipulation. The Ash conformity test was done by a series of social scientists at Swarthmore College. And what it involved 5 people, and 4 of the people were in on it. So 4 people were colluding together. And those 4 people were instructed and were told that when asked, they would pick the shortest line on the chalkboard. Now, the 5th person thought that they were coming in for just a simple vision test. They were not in on the game. So they lined up all 5 of them in a classroom, and the 5th person, the person who wasn't in on it, was the last person to answer the question. So they went down the line. They said, person one, which one's the longest line? And they all picked the shortest line. Shortest line, shortest line, shortest line, shortest line, shortest line. And the fifth person was then asked, which one is the longest line? 75% of the time, they picked what the first four answers said, not even what their own eyes saw. 75% of the time. Now, I'm happy to say every person here is part of the 25% courage group that would stand up against those other four people. But, and just so you understand, less than half of 1% of people when asked in the control group picked the wrong line. So it wasn't a question of whether or not they were confused. But when they were asked after the experiment, the Ash conformity experiment, why did you pick the line that you knew was wrong? They said, I was afraid of being mocked and ridiculed. And the social pressure, I would rather say something I knew was not true than be mocked by the people that went before me. How many times when you're in college do all of a sudden your professor says, so, do you think America's a systemically racist country? Yes, I do, yes, I do, yes, I do, yes, I do, yes, I do. Do you have the courage to say no? The next time, do you say, well, do you think that America is a country worth saving? No, 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 no. Every one of us will be tried with this in the next 5 years. The next 5 years, try like the next 5 minutes. We'll be tried in a variety of different ways. The question is, will we have the preparedness and the courage? And every one of us can say yes enthusiastically now. How about this one? You be forced to get the vaccine? Vaccine is perfect. It's perfect. It has no side effects. It's perfect. It's perfect. No, you might think that, or maybe you don't. Are you all of a sudden going to relent to that? By the way, I want to just shout out one of our students here. I don't know where she is. She said no to getting the vaccine, and she had so many medical exemptions where it literally said the vaccine could kill her, and despite that, Brigham Young University, Hawaii, revoked her $200,000 scholarship and is not allowing her to attend on campus. That is evil. It is evil. And I'm going to say this. This is one of the hardest fights. And again, maybe you decided to get the vaccine. Maybe you didn't. If you've seen what I've seen with the thousands and thousands and thousands of emails that have had very negative reactions to the vaccine, then I think you would definitely see it the way I did. But I just want to say this, is anyone in this room that does not want to get the vaccine, we are going to stand right by you and make sure you are not vaccinated against your will. So everyone here is going to be tried in that manner. And the psychological data says most people are going to fail. The question is, will you be willing to say something different and not conform when the first four people say something that you know is not true? And the fifth thing that I want us to walk away from with this conference, because Turning Point USA, we don't just do events. We are on pace to hit 1,000 high school chapters by the end of this year. And raise your hand if you're a Turning Point USA chapter leader. Please raise your hands. God bless you guys for what you do and your involvement and your fight. And maybe you came here and you're like, oh, I like DeSantis, I like Kayleigh McEnany, I don't really know. Get involved. We have to play offense and we have to take ground from the left. No more ever managing this receding horizon and ground culturally, which means on every single front, from music to art to business to finance, every one of you should be producing new things, taking new risks in the pursuit of saving Western civilization in the country. No more sitting idly by. That's what our parents' generation did, and look what it got us. Instead, it's, you know what? I'm 17 years old, and I'm plenty old enough to do that. You know, if I listened to every single person that told me no, there would be no Turning Point USA. If I listen to every single person that says, Charlie, you need to go to college. Now let me speak to the high school kids. Parents are going to throw me out of here. High school kids, you do not need to go to college to succeed in this country, okay? You don't. Now, maybe it's the right move for you. maybe it's not the right move for you. But it should not be mandatory to go to college to succeed. In fact, I know a lot of people that would have been better without going to college, and that's a different speech for a different time. It kind of goes back to not conforming. But you need to get into that offensive mindset. So let's recap. We need to differentiate between the corporate tyranny we're living under and the free markets that we desire to better humanity. We need to be a conservative movement that values things that matter, that are beautiful, and that are eternal, and that are transcendent. That's the second thing, which also means we must be unafraid to sometimes pick the tough fights. For example, when the governor of Arkansas says that it's a conservative position to allow children to chemically castrate themselves, we as conservatives say, no, that is not a conservative position, and the conservative movement will not tolerate the castration of our children under any circumstances whatsoever. We're not going to put up with that. The third thing, know your stuff. Remember this, a wise man loves to be corrected. Nothing bothers me more than when I see someone who's 20 years old and they think they got it all figured out. You should desire to be corrected. Try to replace truth with error. Learn something new every single day. Commit yourselves to turning off your phone and reading a book or reading something of value that you can actually dive into. The fourth thing, do not conform. Do not conform. All of you are going to go through that ASH conformity test. Every single one of you. When you go back to school this college, do not conform. The final thing, play offense and take ground. You are in this unique position where the biggest threat to the left is you. They want you to be scared, intimidated. They want you to feel weak, mocked, ridiculed, and alone, and definitely afraid. But they are afraid of all of a sudden of a young, diverse, organized movement rising up out of nowhere and saying, we're here to take our country back. And we're not going to conform, and we're going to play offense, and we are going to take ground. And that is my charge for all of you after these last couple days.